Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping in to a barrel-aged Imperial Porter from Smog City Brewing Company. Smog City is based in Torrance, California. I've had quite a few beers from them over the years, but it's been a while since I've had one, and this is a brand new beer by them to me. This specific beer is called Is Ticking Clock. It clocks in at 10.8% ABV, bourbon barrel aged as we discussed, and they also added coffee and coconut. So we've got a big Imperial barrel aged with additives porter, and porters are one of those beer styles that are kind of all over the board in terms of flavor profile. Sometimes you can get some with these kind of funky off flavor undertones, and that in my experience is doubly scary if there's coconut added. I've only had a few coconut porters that actually neither the coconut nor the malts that they used in the beer itself imparted some kind of funk to it. So I'm hopeful that this is one of those that is just sitting right where it should be. And if done well, this has the potential to be a really, really great beer. Every time I have a porter, I always say to myself, I don't drink enough porters. It's not like they're scarce in the marketplace, but there's not as many as other beer styles. Stouts are far more popular, as are IPAs, of course, but porter is the beer style that really got me into craft beer many, many years ago in the first place. So it's always got a nice special place in my heart. So nonetheless, label art here is Ticking Clock. It's just got a pretty clean label design, kind of a royal blue there with kind of a silvery foil kind of effect on it. Looks nice. Is Ticking Clock, I have to assume, is a reference to the Kevin Smith classic Clerks. If you've never seen it, yes, it's in black and white. It is hilarious, but that's my guess. Just their little homage to Clerks. Nonetheless, we've got our nice pointy tipped pointer to get under this wax dipping on this bottle. All right, let's get this poured. Very, very dark. Thicker than your average porter, but it is Imperial. I'm going to slow it down a bit. This one is not having any problem forming a head at all. This looks a lot creamier ahead than you'll typically get on porter. Porters are typically quite effervescent, and the effervescence normally is so severe that even if they form a head, it normally collapses relatively soon. They just kind of go crazy. This one, I can see the top layer of the bubbles kind of breaking down, but overall it looks pretty good. As expected, on an Imperial barrel-aged beer with additives, yes, the aroma is quite pronounced. I'm a good foot and a half from this beer, and yes, I can smell it quite clearly. It smells great. Visually, yeah, this is not absolutely pitch black. It's very close. Porters are not pitch black, but it is Imperial, so it obviously has more fermentables in there. So looks really nice. Honestly, formed a really great head. It doesn't look like it's going to collapse any further than that. Let's give a good sniff. Oh, wow. Oh, that smells fantastic. Okay, so what I can get on the nose is very dominant coffee and bourbon. The coconut does come through, but it's very subtle, and underneath that you can smell that roasty edge to the malt bill. But the coffee is the dominant aroma with bourbon behind that. But it smells absolutely fantastic, and what they put in here sounds great to me. So let's just jump in and see what this one's about. Ooh, oh wow. Oh yeah, that is a well done porter right there. No funk in sight. So the first thing I can tell you, I was a little surprised by that. This beer's got a bite to it. It's got a little spiciness to it. This is not a super, super smooth beer. I don't want to say it's boozy up front. It's not at all. You can clearly taste that bourbon, but it's got a little bite to it. It's got spirit. And immediately, the flavor that hits you first is that coffee. So that was the dominant aroma. It is the dominant flavor. The secondary aroma was the bourbon, and indeed, that's the secondary flavor. Honestly, the coconut in the flavor profile of this is there, but about in the same extent that it's there in the aroma. So it is there, but it's subtle. It's really leading with the bourbon barrel and the coffee. And of course, there is this nice rich underpinning of the malt bill to kind of tie it all together. That naturally in a beer with coffee added does really bind to kind of that flavor profile. So you get that intensity of coffee and then you get that roasty rich underpinning from the malt, and they really do just naturally kind of find each other in the flavor profile. Distinctly different flavors, but they do bind well together. Absolutely delicious. As I said, a lot of porters, the malt bill can impart some kind of funky off flavors. Same thing can happen with beers with coconut. This has both, but they bypass the funk. There's nothing funky about this at all. It tastes exactly right. It tastes like a really well done porter with really nice barrel selection, requisite amount of time, a nice hearty bit of coffee in there, and just the coconut is this just little bonus ingredient. So it plays its part both on the aroma and the flavor. I'm a big fan of this. Before I jump back in for a second sip, I was really paying keen attention to the mouthfeel, not so much the body, but the mouthfeel was exactly right. So as you expect with a porter, there's a lot of carbonation you can feel on the palate. It's got a little bit more thickness to it than your average porter, but this is an Imperial, almost 11%, so that's expected. This one does get pretty creamy when you agitate around the palate. That doesn't always happen with porters, but it does with this one, and I'm not surprised given how the head forms. So overall, really nice beer. Let's jump in for a second sip. We'll explore this body, let the flavors re-intensify, and we'll talk about the finish. Very nice indeed. It's got a little kick up front. It's got a little kick. I like that. It's a big beer. So yeah, second sip, intensification, coffee, bourbon, malt bill. Coconut does float on the back. So it's got pretty much like an immediate, very quick blossoming of intensity of flavor. You can start to kind of pick them all out. That holds for about 5 seconds, and then it starts to dial back a little bit. And the finish on this one, as with most porters, it's nice and wet and round to the end. There's no suggestion of dryness at all. But as you might expect, given that this is barrel aged, it's got really intense coffee, it's got a lot of malts in there, so a nice intense malt bill, and that bourbon as well. The finish is definitely longer than your average porter. It's pretty much where I expected it would be for what they put in it. But compared to your average porter, Imperial or otherwise, this does have quite a long finish. What you're left with on the end is really a lingering kind of roasty edge mixed with coffee and just a little suggestion of bourbon lingering on the back. But it's very much dominated by the coffee and the underpinning of the roasty malt bill. That's what you're left with on the end. And it really does linger on the back of the palate, significantly longer than your average porter would do, typically. It's just got such intensity to it. The coffee in this is not, French Italian style roast. I'd say it's kind of like a medium dark type roast coffee intensity. Tastes very much like coffee, distinctly coffee, but it is lacking kind of that edge of being burned. There's no smoky undertones to it at all. It's just like a really nice, rich, intense roast that somebody put a lot of grinds in before they brewed it. So there's a real intensity of the coffee in this. Honestly, so often with a barrel-aged beer, they'll let the barrel lead. I like the delicate balance that they chose on this. Yes, that coffee is intense and they're kind of letting that take the forefront to the barrel aging. The barrel aging is just like this added thing that ties it all together, kind of like the coconut. Granted, it's a lot more intense in the flavor profile, but it's not leading the way. It's not taking charge. It's not trying to take center stage. And really, for all the intensity of the coffee, that doesn't seem to be the case either. My point is, it's extremely well balanced. Yes, the coffee leads, the bourbon's behind that, malt bills, tertiary, and then the coconut's fourth. But the way that it all comes together, how they all kind of pop in and move in and out, and from where it starts when you first swallow to where it ends, it's just beautifully balanced. I am a really big fan of this. It's absolutely delicious. I love porters, and this one is done right. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. So this was Smog City Brewing Company's Is Ticking Clock, an Imperial Porter clocking in at 10.8% ABV. This one was bourbon barrel aged, also brewed with coffee and coconut. Smog City Brewing Company is based in Torrance, California. So starting with the aroma, as you might expect, on a high ABV barrel aged beer, the aromas were quite intense. This was no exception. It was one, as you were pouring it from a couple feet away, you could really start to pick it up. Got right up on it. Coffee really jumped out at you, that underlying roasty malt bill. Coconut was there, it was just subtle, and the barrel aging really added in its own aroma element as well. Smelled absolutely fantastic. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I talk about this a lot when talking about porters specifically, and also any beer brewed with coconut. Those are two kind of danger zone things. Porter malt bills are really hard to pull off for whatever reason. They often take on this funky, almost like bad fruit flavor, and it's really unappetizing in the glass. Coconut can produce kind of a similar profile. It takes the skunky, funky flavor, and I'm not talking Brettanomyces funky, I'm talking just off. It tastes wrong, it tastes bad. And for them to take a beer that's a porter, to get the porter malt bill right, then add coconut to it and get the coconut right is an absolute gem of a porter, and they really nailed it in this. The coffee was really dominant, the barrel aged behind that. The coconut was in there, albeit subtle, but everything had its own voice, and it was truly, truly delicious. This is just a well-done porter. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body on this was significantly heavier than your average porter. Then again, this is Imperial, and it felt like it. This was a good, solid, medium heavy, exactly as expected. Body does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this, again, there was a little more resistance to it than your average porter, but again, it's Imperial, but you could feel that telltale carbonation on the palate, and when you agitated this one, it did get pretty creamy. Mouthfeel was absolutely fantastic. Gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the finish on this was very, very long. This is a barrel-aged beer, so you're going to expect it to be longer than your average beer. Indeed, that was the case here. But kind of what was surprising to me was it was really much more the coffee and the malt bill that really extended out the length. Sure, the bourbon gave it some extra impetus to get there, but what you were left with at the very end of the finish on this one was actually coffee and that underlying malt bill. Very, very long, absolutely delicious, nice and wet and round to the end. Finish does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, porters can be all over the board. This one poured a beautiful, thick, creamy head. You don't get that often. They tend to be very effervescent. Typically, a porter head is going to collapse a lot quicker than, say, a stout counterpart. This one stuck around the whole time, formed beautifully. Head and retention does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, yes, it's Imperial, but it's still not quite pitch black. It was close, but it wasn't quite there. Just very, very dark brown. Appearance, as expected, does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance, overall, I really, really enjoyed the balance on this beer. This is top tier. For me, though, as with both the aroma and the flavor profile, I would have liked just a little bit more presence from the coconut. It was there, but it was just a little too delicate compared to the absolute pungency of the coffee and the malt bill in particular. I would have liked a little more coconut to come through in aroma and flavor. Minor nitpick, but I did dock 1 point on the balance for that fact. Balance does get a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, I loved it. I love porters. It's the OG style that got me into craft beer in the first place 20 years ago, and I love them to this day. To get a well done one, especially with these additives and done right, is just a diamond in the rough. Feeling in the intangible does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, you may already suspect, and if you did, you're correct. It got top marks in all but one category. That was a minor nitpick. Example of the style does get a perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Smog City Brewing Company's Is Ticking Clock to a 99 out of 100. This is top tier porter, guys. If you like big beers, if you like porters in general, Imperial flavored beers, barrel aged, whatever your shtick, anything that kind of falls in that cluster, this is one to keep on your radar. I don't know if they brew this year round or not. It's the first time I've seen it, and I'm very, very grateful it popped up with a notification on my phone through Tavour. I grabbed it right away. I love porters. I love Imperial porters. I love barrel-aged porters. I like flavored, non-flavored. This was all of those and then some, and absolutely nailed it. Fantastic beer. I highly recommend this one. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. I know it takes a few seconds to do it, but if you like the content that you're receiving here, if you get some value out of the reviews, gives you an idea of what beers are out there, what you may want to keep your eyes out to try to grab, or like that we go a lot more in depth with our beers than, say, other channels, then yeah, just go ahead and subscribe. You can always change your mind after the fact, and if you want to know when our new content drops, see if it's something you want to hear about, just click that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.